Today we're going to talk about the 6 trials of Jesus, but before we get there, I have to lay the groundwork, because as with everything in the Bible, you have to get back to the beginning.
The foundation.
Right. And the beginning really starts with Jacob and Esau. And that's kind of a surprise, but when you look at it, if we look at the blessing that Jacob received, and he was to get the blessing. Remember when they struggled in the womb in Genesis 25, and the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it be so, why am I thus?" And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. Now that was before they're even born. God decided it.
That's the way it's going to be.
That's the way it's going to be. Now you can imagine in a culture where the eldest son got a double portion, Esau is not willing to accept that, right? You know, and he's the older brother, and I'm sure he picked on Jacob just like older brothers always do, you know. But after Jacob received his blessing, interestingly, is this, when he received the blessing pretending to be Esau. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren. Let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. Now notice Jacob is given the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth. That's really, really important. Because after Esau comes, he demands a blessing also. Now listen to Jacob's blessing, or Esau's blessing. And Isaac his father answered and said, Behold, thy dwelling shall be in the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. So where's Esau going to dwell? He's always going to be among Jacob, because that's what the blessing said. Didn't say he got the fatness. Didn't say he got the dew of heaven. It says he will dwell in the fatness and the dew.
He's going to be living off his brother.
Yeah.
Well, we need to kind of keep the questions to a minimum, because we're going to record this today. Other people are going to said they want to see this. So.
That bless thee and curse thee thing, I didn't ever get that, actually.
I know, I was rereading this, and it jumped out at me. And the rest of Esau's blessing, and by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother, and it shall come to pass when thou shalt have the dominion, thou shalt break his yoke off his neck. So at some point, Esau gets the dominion, but that isn't the birthright. Okay? It's important to understand that, because nowhere does it ever say, Jacob, you're going to lose the birthright. And Jacob still has the birthright to today. Now, this sets up, when we go through the scripture, we find out that after he received this blessing, it says, And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of my mourning for my father at hand, then will I slay my brother Jacob. Now, God didn't allow him to slay Jacob, but Esau hates Jacob. And nowhere in the scripture can you find that Jacob hates Esau. There's times when Jacob feared Esau, you know, when he was coming back and stuff. But this is a situation we have to this day, and it's also a situation that happens with the time of Christ. Because we have, in 925 is when you have the split of the kingdoms. You have the northern house go one way and the southern kingdom go another. And because both houses rarely obeyed God, eventually that led to Israel being divorced, and that's the book of Hosea. That's why Hosea had to marry an adulterous woman, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And then it fits into God's law, because when God divorces Israel, he has to send her out of his house. So they have to go out of the land. They can't be in the land God gave them, and they never can go back. And this is something that the Judeo-Christians don't understand, because they keep talking about the Jews going back to Palestine, that it was prophesied that they go back. Not the northern house. The northern house was never to go back because they were divorced. They don't belong in God's house when they're divorced. They'll eventually be in God's house again, but not at this time period. So in 722 BC, Israel was invaded, conquered, and deported to Assyria, along with 200,000 Judahites. Now, the reason we know that there were 200,000 Judahites is Sennacherib actually built a monument that states this, and that monument was found. And think about that. God made sure that Israel had the house of Judah with them because that's the ruling tribe, right? And within the kingdom of Judah, you have the Levitical priesthood. So he made sure that they had kings among them and priests among them. So once Assyria collapses, these people then go through the Caucasus Mountains into Europe and the British Isles, as foretold in Isaiah 42, verses 16 through 19, Psalm 2:8, 2 Samuel 7:10, Jeremiah 31, 7 through 10, Hosea 8:8. So these people never go back to Palestine. Now we go forward to 607 BC, and that's when Babylon starts attacking the southern kingdom of Judah. And this is, or Jerusalem. Yeah, in Jerusalem, southern kingdom. Now, this is all in Jeremiah. Jeremiah told them that this would happen. And this is when the 70 years starts for their captivity to Babylon. And from 607 BC to 586 BC, there's sieges going on back and forth. And it isn't until 586 that you finally have the small 2 to 3 million that were deported to Nebuchadnezzar, deported around Babylon. But at the end of the 70-year captivity, in 537, you have 42,000 Judahites returned to Jerusalem. Now think how many millions of Israelites are out there who've gone through up to Europe. So this is a very, very small number that ends up in the land of Palestine. Now, while the house of Judah was gone with this captivity, the Edomites moved in. You know, I mean, that's the history of man, isn't it? If there's vacant land, somebody moves into it. So the Edomites are in there, and it isn't until Ezra and Nehemiah go back, rebuild the wall, and then they divide the people, remember, by their genealogies. And some of them are kicked out with their mixed multitudes. And interestingly, some of those people ended up in Samaria, and this is where you get the Samaritans. Okay? And this is from my dad was asked the question. He used to do a pamphlet called The Answering Service, and this was a question he was asked, and this is his answer. He was asked the question, who are these Samaritans? Samaria was the capital city of the 10-tribed house of Israel during the time of the divided kingdom, before the captivities. It was built by King Omri of Israel. Thus the Assyrians called Israel by the name Beth Cumri, which means house of Omri. So in 724 BC, Shalmaneser began the siege of Samaria, and the city fell to his successor Sargon 3 years later. The Assyrians deported 27,280 people from that city, as almost all of them had already been deported earlier. Even so, many of the Israelites were left behind. Sargon settled many colonists from Babylonian Hamath, 2 Kings 17:24, and his grandson Esarhaddon and later monarchs continued this policy by introducing Elamites into the land as well. Thus, they had an integrated society. During this time, the foreign colonists, who were idolaters, decided the local gods of the land were unfavorable to them. So they requested that an Israelite from the Assyrian captivity come and teach them the ways of God. The result was a curious mixture of idolatry and the law of Moses. They rejected the writings of the prophets, accepting only the law of Moses. These were the people that the Judeans found in the land 2 centuries later when they returned to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. When Ezra and Nehemiah would have nothing to do with those who had intermarried and those who had a mixed religion, the conflict began between the Judeans and the Samaritans, as they came to be called. One of the Samaritan governors, Sanballat, Nehemiah 2:10, opposed the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, and he later built the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim. Their doctrines did not differ greatly from that of the Judean Sadducees of Christ's days. Now remember, Christ heals 10 lepers, remember that? And he tells them to go to the priest. Well, they didn't go to the priest in Jerusalem. They went to the priest because they were Samaritans. They went to the other priest. And that's one of the things that's really important to understand, is though they were not Israelites, they were mixed Israelites, and they had their own temple. So the Judeans did not associate with the Samaritans because of their conflicts recorded in Ezra and Nehemiah. And some of the Samaritans, at least originally, were of Israelite stock, being left over from the Assyrian captivity. However, as time passed, there would have been fewer and fewer of them, which we see in countries where, where you're the minority, they tend to intermarry with the majority. So then we get to another important prophecy that also deals with when Christ came, and that's the 70 weeks of Daniel. Most of the Judeo-Christian world takes the decree by Artaxerxes and says that's the beginning of the 70 weeks, and they go up to right before Christ and say that's when the 69 weeks end, and then we have this period of time. For some reason, God stopped his clock and doesn't restart it until he returns. And their reasons for that stopping of the clock is varied, but none of them ever made any sense to me because God doesn't do that anywhere else in the Scripture. But if we look at 457 BC is when Nehemiah, the wall's been rebuilt, and he reads the law to Israel. And if we start the clock of Daniel's 70 weeks at that time, it coincides just perfectly where we get to the 70th week of Daniel. And remember, in the 70th week of Daniel, in the middle, Daniel 9:26, and Messiah shall be cut off. So obviously, the 70th week of Daniel is during the time period of Christ. It starts at AD 27, and Christ is crucified AD 31. And that fits perfectly. And the end of the 70 weeks is with the death of Stephen. Then, from that point forward, we have been in the Great Tribulation. It's not this little 7-year period of time. It's a great period of time. And the Great Tribulation lasts from the time of Stephen's death, and we're in it now, and it lasts till Christ returns. So you have to understand that in the time frame also of Christ. Then, to get back to the Edomites, in 126, John Hyrcanus was the chief priest and theocratic king of Judea, and he was of Israelite descent. Okay? He extended the Judean control, and he absorbed Edom, into his kingdom. Okay? Now, he was a corrupt king, he was a corrupt high priest, and he did exactly what God told him not to do, and that was to absorb these. So they